Thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited to welcome to Google Chef Eric Ripert from Le Bernardin restaurant in New York City. Chef Eric Ripert has 3 stars from Michelin, the highest rating, as well as one of only half a dozen restaurants in New York City to have 4 stars from the New York Times. He's cooked in France and has been cooking in the United States for the last approximately 20 years, most of them at Le Bernardin. He took over upon the death of the original chef and has been leading the charge ever since. Le Bernardin is the 4-star restaurant in New York that has had that status for the longest of any restaurant in New York currently. And it is a fish specialist, which is also something rather unique in the world of high-end food and cuisine. There really aren't any other restaurants in the US at that caliber that really are a fish specialist. And last month he co-wrote, and it came out, his book On the Line, which really discusses not only recipes, but his experience owning, operating, and running the restaurant, from the excitement and chaos of cooking pre-dinner, dealing with difficult customers, finding the best food to serve and ingredients, and really dealing with the whole hospitality issue as well as just cuisine. Please, everyone, welcome Chef Eric Ripert.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm honored by your presence. I would like to start a little bit from the beginning of my career, and then going through Le Bernardin, and then explaining the book a little bit. So I'm born in south of France in a town called Antibes, and my parents moved a lot in the south of France, and was a very, very bad student. I had the worst grades, and at age 14, the school didn't want to keep me any longer. And they recommend my parents to find something for me to do. And I had such a passion for eating, not necessarily cooking, but eating, that I was thrilled that I could eventually have a possibility to work in a culinary school, which I did. I went to culinary school at 15, and then at 17 moved to Paris and went to work in a very traditional restaurant that is an icon in the industry called La Tour d'Argent. And when I went there, they were celebrating their 400th anniversary. So it was really a traditional place. From La Tour d'Argent, I moved to, 2 years later, I went to work with a very famous chef at the time, is still today an icon in our industry. His name is Joël Robuchon. And he was considered at the time with Freddy Girardet in Switzerland to be the best chef in the galaxy, basically. From there, I wanted to travel, so I went to ask him in 1988 if he could help me to find a place somewhere abroad. And he asked me where I wanted to go, and I wanted to go to Brazil, and he said he didn't want to send me on vacation. So then I asked him if I could go to Spain, and he thought it was too close. And finally, he sent me to Washington, D.C., where I worked at the Watergate Hotel, famous not for the food, but for the scandal, of course. However, the Watergate Hotel had the brilliant chef at the time. His name was Jean-Louis Paladin. He was one of the pioneers to work with farmers and work with fishermen and growers, and a lot of those people were supporting his restaurant, and he was supporting them by obviously buying products from them. And in the 70s, in the 80s, it was not that common. Not too many chefs were in contact with the people at the source. So I worked with them for a few years, and finally in 1991, I joined Le Bernardin. Le Bernardin, is in New York since 1986. It's a seafood restaurant, and 99% of our menu is seafood, and we have 1% being non-seafood, just in case if someone gets lost, and you know, we don't want to lose you. In 1994, the owner passed away. I took the responsibility, full responsibility of that kitchen, and until today, I'm still, of course, at Le Bernardin. I'm a co-owner of the place. I have done 3 books, this one being the 3rd book. First book being a traditional recipe book, where we collected recipes of what we were doing at the time at Le Bernardin. Second book was very different, was I believe a beautiful coffee table book. It was an experimentation in between a painter, a writer, two photographers, and myself. And we were exploring the four seasons. And to do so, we rented 4 different houses in 4 different locations, one being in Vermont for the fall, California, actually in Napa for the spring, the Hamptons for the summer, and for the winter we thought it would be a good idea to go to Puerto Rico. Well, you know, leeks and potatoes are not too inspiring to do a book if you are in a cold area, so we went to the tropical area. And we were improvising, all of us were improvising. So on the morning I will go to the market, buy whatever I will find, come back home and cook all day for about, we were about six of us in a house, and the painter was painting whatever he wanted. Everything had to have a relationship with the food. I thought the food not only will bring us together, but would inspire us, and that book was Return to Cooking. And then the latest one, On the Line, is it's a documentary of the life of Le Bernardin. And I wanted to do this book because I'm obviously very passionate about what's happening at Le Bernardin, very inspired by my team. I wanted to pay homage to the team who makes the restaurant successful, the team who allow me to travel and to be able to talk on the front of you right now. So we hired a journalist from the New York Times, and she spent about a month and a half with us and worked with everybody at the restaurant, from the ladies answering the phone to the dishwashing, dishwashers, with the cooks, with the waiters, and we created this documentary, but it's in a book. Obviously, it's not a film, and I think the team obviously is very inspired by looking at the results of what is in a book. This book obviously is inspiring for foodies and people who have interest in our industry. However, I think this book can be inspiring for anyone who wants to create an environment where it's going to be interaction with employees and customers. We have to create a very strong team, because every day for us in the restaurant industry, at 12 o'clock and at 8 o'clock at night, it's the war. It's pure chaos. You can imagine you have 100 people coming into a room who want to eat different food, and you have to be able to serve hot, delicious food to 100 people at the same time. And obviously, when a table of 8, if you order 8 different appetizers, what you want on the front of you as a client is the right dish, and you don't want the dish of your neighbor or from another table. So that requires a great organization, and it requires building a team. And we have built this team over the years. When I started at Le Bernardin, I was, I think, fairly young to have a position of a chef, and I made a lot of mistakes, learned from my mistakes. Being educated in France, in a kitchen in France, the way we were educated was through humiliation. So you were physically humiliated. So basically, they were kicking you in the butt, and sometimes punching you in the shoulders or pulling your ears. And they were breaking you psychologically. They were insulting you all day, and the idea was, well, we're going to break this guy, and then we can build up someone who's going to really be a superhero and is going to be a champion in all, no matter what will happen in a restaurant, which I think it's a total mistake. It really doesn't work. So when I came to the US, I was very abusive, and what I realized is that few months later, I was basically by myself in the kitchen. Everybody left, and from that day, I learned the lesson that building a team requires patience, passion, of course, And what we do, we do a little bit what I have seen here in your company, which is, by the way, your headquarters is amazing. I have never seen something like that. I am as inspired as you may be inspired, I hope, with the book. But you know, it's a paradox. But in a kitchen, cooks and waiters never have time to sit down and have a good meal. It's always like very quickly. The food is always overlooked. So from when I was at the restaurant at the beginning, we were eating crappy food. We didn't have time to eat. And then I thought, how can we serve people and be inspired to cook good food if ourselves we don't eat good food? From that point of view, we created menus for ourselves. We created space. We created time. Because we always thought we never had time to eat. So we created an hour break for us to eat good food. And that was the beginning of nurturing the team, of making the team also responsible for and be taking care of their territory. We had a little bit of the mentality of the carrot or the stick. And basically, without knowing, we were running a dictature in that restaurant, and I was the dictator, and everything had to pass by me and be approved, and you were rewarded or not punished, but you were reprimanded, and that was again such a big mistake. So again, we built with our management a different mentality, and today everybody is in the management taking care with great pride of their territory, what I call territories, either way the dining room or the offices or the kitchen. And it's still a work in progress. It has been, for me, an incredible adventure, learning from my mistakes. Again, I'm very thankful to the knowledge of my team and the loyalty and the patience that they had to stay with me, because most of them are with me for 15 years, 20 years. If you have the book, you will see we have our associé, and the associé is the most essential person in the kitchen. To me, is the ultimate rank in the kitchen, because sous chefs and chefs are basically management titles. Associé is really someone who's has to be kind of a magician or an alchemist in our kitchen. And associé to me is the most difficult position that you can have, because we cannot measure flavors with inches or with ounces. Flavors is all in the mind. It's a little bit like music. You cannot measure it. You cannot, even if in recipes we try to codify and weight the ingredients, the sauce is very ethereal, and the sauce is something that moves all the time. I'm sure you make coffee at home, or you brew some tea. You can imagine if you make the coffee and you drink it right away, you have a product. If you leave your coffee pot on the stove or in a machine for 8 hours and you go drink your coffee, you have something totally different. So you can imagine a sauce when you use ingredients like spices or garlic, vegetables. That product evolved tremendously in a matter of hours. So the associé in the kitchen is the key person.
When you come up with menu items, how do you orchestrate that? Do you meet with your team? Do you give them direction? Like, how do you collaborate?
Well, creativity, it's something out there, and you cannot press a button and say, okay, I'm creative now, and in 2 hours you press a button and you stop being creative. Creativity is, some people are creative, some people are not. For me, the process is that I am inspired by my surrounding. I'm inspired by my traveling. I'm inspired by my interaction with the people who are selling food to me, by visiting markets. New York City being such a monumental melting pot of different ethnicities and culture, I'm exposed to new products all the time. And my brain works like a sponge. I'm absorbing all those information. And I never know when an idea is going to come out. Sometimes it's immediate. I see an ingredient and I'm inspired and I'm creating something. And sometimes it takes a month and it comes back. Sometimes it takes years. And what I do is that I always take notes on pieces of paper, and I collect those notes. And sometimes it's what I write doesn't make any sense. Sometimes it's combinations that are totally crazy. However, then from those notes that I take, I write lists, and then from those lists, I edit to some new ideas. So for instance, you will see a salmon with a truffle sauce, and then you will see a pork bun, and something happened, and the salmon ends up with a pork bun, and it's an idea again that I bring to the team. So the team is my sous chef, the sous chefs being the senior management of the kitchen, and we discuss those ideas together, and we try to materialize the ideas. And it's a collegial approach to the primary idea that I had in my mind. We edit like that, and we finally cook something. We test it. Most of the time it's bad. We lose 90% of the ideas, and we keep our 10%, which is plenty for our menu. I reassure you. We run those ideas in special, and we give those dishes to friends and people who are coming to the restaurant a lot. And then if finally we all agree that the idea was good and it's a good dish, we put it on the menu.
Okay.
So it's a long process from the primary idea to something finished.
Which I love that in your book you kind of go through that and show the sketches and everything else, which I thought was really cool.
Yes.
So, like, how often do you change the menu, and do you keep core items on there for a long time because customers come back? I mean, here at Google we change the menu every day, but not a lot of people do that. Don't thank me; it's all those people back there.
I used to follow the seasons and say, okay, we have obviously 4 seasons, and we're going to do 4 menus, and it's going to be on September 21st, it's going to be fall menu, and then in December we will have the winter menu, and it didn't really work for me because I felt pressure to perform and to bring something new with an artificial date. Sometimes the way I work, I'm a bit slower than the season itself. And also the season lasts 3 months. So in between day 1 of your season and the last day of the season, a lot of the produce and fruits have changed already. So from that organization that I had, we totally changed. And now we change the menu dish by dish. Like we work, let's suppose we want to change the halibut dish. We work on it. And until we get a better halibut dish than the previous one, we're not changing the recipe. Saying that our menu changed no matter what, about 90% of the menu changed during the period of time of a year. I don't necessarily want to have signature dishes at the restaurant because as soon as you have a signature dish, you become stagnant. Your cooks on top of it become more comfortable with it, and one day they are bored to death with the dish and don't have any passion anymore for that, and just overlook completely the details that make the dish good. And on top of it, in a city like New York, which is such a competitive city, as soon as you stop and you rely on your past success and decide to have signature dishes, you're just regressing, you're not progressing. So that's our philosophy there.
Okay, because that brings me to my next question. And you've been one of the best chefs here in America for so long. How do you keep doing it year after year? And what's next for you, really?
Retirement. Okay. I don't know. I don't think like that. I mean, when I
well, obviously, because it's just unbelievable. So.
Well, thank you, but I don't think like that at all. I have a very normal life. I go to work like everybody else, and as much, I mean, the industry has a lot of glamour today, but it's no glamour in a kitchen, really. When you walk into a kitchen, it's no photographers, it's no television, it's no compliments, it's hardcore environment. You have to perform, you have to do your duty, and it's something that, as soon as I walk into the restaurant, I'm focused on today my duty of being the chef, which is basically being the inspiration of the team, being the creative mind, the financially responsible person as well, because it's a big aspect of our industry. We have to be sustainable, and that takes my entire time. So I go to the restaurant, I walk into the kitchen, and I'm focused from the minute I'm entering the kitchen until I leave, and I don't care about being the number one or being the number two or having 4 stars or having 3 stars. I don't think like that. I think, how can we make this dish the best dish? How can we improve the quality of the team? How can we have a better system to perform with less struggle during the chaotic time of what we call service?
Okay, and so like you were talking about your team and how valuable they were. What's your turnover rate, and when you hire a cook, what do you look for?
We have about 40 cooks in a kitchen. I mean, 41 with me, and out of the 40 cooks, probably 2/3 stays more than 3 years. Mm-hmm. And we have key people like the associate that I was talking about before, who are with us for 20 years. We have the gentleman in garde-manger being the station where you prepare all the cold appetizers of the restaurant. That gentleman is with us for 20 years as well. The butcher is with us for 8 years. And then we have the sous chef stays with us for about 5-6 years. Some of line cooks stay 3 years, and then we have people who come only for a year. Mm-hmm. Very young cooks coming out of school who want to have many experiences in different restaurants. But what we try to do is that we try to keep everybody on board for 3 years. And we have organized a program where our kitchen looks like a rectangle. So you start on this, not here, but if you start here, it's the cold station. It's the easiest station. And then you're going to move to another station a little bit more complex, and then which is still on the cold side of the kitchen. And then you will eventually, after 8 months, move on the line, what we call the line, which is along the stove. And you will be taking care of hot appetizers. And then you will be taking care of all the vegetables and side orders for the restaurant. And then if you stay more than a year and a half, you're going to move to the other side, which is the main course side, where we teach different techniques, poaching and sautéing and roasting. And then if you stay almost 3 years with us, you will finally have access to the saucier station. And every cook wants to become associate because it's the most, like I described before, the most magical aspect of cooking. So we create incentives for the cooks to stay with us 3 years, and at the same time we feel responsible for their education and make sure that in 3 years they get what they deserve and what they want, which is that station, the saucier.
Okay, well, great. So I want to open the questions up to the audience, because actually this is one of the most packed I've ever seen it. So
thank you.
Just goes to show how popular
Thank you
you
for
are.
coming during lunch too.
So anyone want to start with questions? The microphone's up there. Okay, I knew we'd have one. All right.
Hi, my question is, could you describe a little bit more about your process for how you put together a menu? So do you think of it more as course by course, or do you think of it as a whole? So if you could describe that more. Thanks.
Sure. The menu is broken down into 3 sections. Because when you come to the restaurant, it's a prefix, and you have 3 courses and dessert. I mean, canapé, which is a little bite to begin. Then cold appetizer, hot appetizer, main course, and dessert, and cookies and chocolates. So we work dish by dish, but what we look at is to the whole menu, and we try to have a certain harmony and complementary in between dishes. So we try not to repeat fish in between the cold appetizer and the main course. So if you have, for instance, fluke ceviche as an appetizer, you won't have fluke cooked as a main course. And then we try to bring with every dish a different sauce. So it's never a repeat in between the dishes. We also create testing menus, and the way we think when we create a testing menu is to it's going to be a progression of intensity and flavors and texture. So you start with most of the time something cold, and most of the time in terms of flavor it's not as powerful as the end of the menu. So you start with something which is pretty subtle, and then we build up, and from cold you go to warm or hot with sometimes some herbal infusions and soft combinations of different flavors. And then at the end you have something really powerful, something with a lot of punch, a lot of spice. And that also allowed the sommelier to create a wine pairing that will start with a wine that wouldn't have too much power and will be very light in essence. And then it allows the sommelier to serve red wine toward the end, which is for fish kind of challenging for us to create recipes that are going to be paired with red wine. So it's a progression. So we to answer your question, we look one by one, and then we look at the entire menu, and we try to create harmony in flavors and textures.
Great, thank you. Next.
So Chef, a lot of us in our day-to-day walk the fine line between multitasking and serving a large audience of customers, while at the same time focusing on customer satisfaction and the satisfaction that a singular one of those customers feels towards our business. So how do you balance in your everyday doing a lot of things, whether it's in the kitchen or with books or traveling, while still focusing on the customer?
Well, we are in the hospitality business. Therefore, we have an interaction with the client, and we have a mentality about serving. And the waiters are eager to serve. I mean, I always say, when I have meetings with them, I'm always saying that I'm a merchant of soup and you're the delivery guy. So that it keeps us kind of humble about it. And when people come to the restaurant, they come to have an experience. They come to have an experience that is positive and make them happy. And we have to deliver a service that will make them happy. Therefore, we have to be a little bit of, how you say, psychologues, especially the front team, the dining room team, who has the direct contact with the client, has to be understanding and reading the client. So we are very sensitive to that. We have in the book actually a list that we call the 129 cardinal sins.
Oh yeah, that's really funny actually.
And it's a list that we started with 50 items on, and now we have, actually today we have 136, but it's constantly evolving.
It's on page 126.
And on that list, for instance, you will see that I think the beginning of the list is that when someone enters the dining room and walk into your dining room, you acknowledge that person with a smile and eye contact within 30 seconds. You don't let your clients arrive and just like you somewhere else, you spacey and you ignore them. So we have built that list for the front of the house, and then in the kitchen we we try to work with zero ego. You know, chefs have egos, and
Really? Not me.
but we are here to make the person happy again. So if someone comes to the restaurant and says, well, can you change the sauce, and can I have my fish well done, and can I have no salt, and we're not going to have an attitude. We are going to say, okay, as much as we recommend the way we do, we are very eager and pleased to serve that to you. So that's the mentality that we have, and it's what we cultivate in a restaurant. No, I mean, we have zero tolerance for ego. And then, of course, I represent the kitchen, and I'm the contact with the clients. And I go to the tables if someone wants to talk to me, or if I go in a dining room and I see someone is looking in my direction, I go and create a relationship with that person as well.
So let me just ask a quick question before the other person. So 129, it says to be continued. Is that gonna 130 is in your next book, or what are you gonna do about that?
Well, we have. I mean, it says one to be continued, and now we have 136 cardinal sins. So it's evolving all the time.
Right.
Yes, we're adding. We learn every day things that we didn't think about, and we document.
And then, do you have an idea for a next book already, or?
I'm just trying to promote this one.
Good answer. All right. All right.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. It's really exciting to have you here. So I love going to restaurants and having new dining experiences, but I'm also a vegetarian, and I find that the two don't go together very well. So it's really hard to go to restaurants sometimes, and you find that you just can't eat the overwhelming majority of things on the menu. So I guess, one thing is, what do you think people can do to make vegetarian cooking more of an exciting and interesting experience? Because I think you can have great flavors and great things going with it. And why do you think people don't do it now?
You're talking about restaurants or at home? Restaurants.
Restaurants.
Yes. Well, for us, I mean, we specialize we're supposedly the temple of seafood. So we deal with a lot of fish. However, we always have vegetarian options on the menu, and not something uninspired. We try to really put a lot of effort into it and have something that is going to be delicious. It is true that for chefs, when you are a chef, you want to cook with all the ingredients possible on the planet. So fish and meat and vegetables and so on. So chefs sometimes are a bit frustrated to limit themselves to do something specialized. Cooking vegetarian, obviously, it's specializing yourself in one aspect of the cooking. But I find more and more of chefs that are excited about cooking vegetarian food. So I think, and you can see that in your restaurants here, you have even some vegan options, vegetarian options. 15 years ago, that was not even understood what was, so it's a progress, and in a young generation, we see more and more of people interested in vegetarian and in vegan as well. So I think it's a work in progress. Chefs are, like I said, getting more excited, and it's a change of mentality that is happening, but change of mentalities that do not happen overnight. It takes a bit of time, so I think you're going to be pleased more and more every day, and you will be seeing much more restaurants serving vegetables. But California is probably, and especially this region here, the vegetables and produce are so incredible. It's inspiring the chefs more than some other parts of the country. So you're very lucky actually to be in this region for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chef, thank you for being here. My question is, chefs of your stature often have to fight the urge to overextend themselves and build their restaurant empires. And how do you balance between opening many outposts throughout the world to share your vision and your cuisine with different parts of the world, and trying to stay within the confines of your Le Bernardin and your main place? And second part of the question is, what's your percentage of actually being on the line and firing dishes as opposed to expediting and just overseeing the overall kitchen? Thank you.
I have Le Bernardin, and then we have 3 other restaurants, one in Cayman Island, and one in Washington, D.C., and one in Philadelphia. And the way I structure the organization is that I really want to spend most of my time at Le Bernardin. It's where I have the most fun. It's where I can be creative, and it's basically my baby. But it is true that today chefs are expanding and are opening restaurants, and I have been very cautious not to open too many restaurants, but sometimes opportunities are good, and it's also a way for us to promote our own staff to better positions. Someone who has been a sous chef and is ambitious is going to leave me to go to work for another chef. So if I have another restaurant, he will eventually become the chef in that place. But to have a certain lightness about managing other restaurants, what I have done, I have created licensing partnership deals with the Ritz-Carlton hotels. Because Ritz-Carlton has the reputation of delivering excellence, they obsess with quality of service, they obsess with quality, period. So by doing that, we place the chef in their hotel, I create the menu, and then we visit them periodically with either way myself or a small team that I have to overlook those operations. And it's very light for me because I don't have to manage fully the properties. They are managing. They're trying to deliver the quality that we require. So it allows me to spend a lot of time at Le Bernardin. Now, when I am at Le Bernardin, I'm not on the line cooking. And if I can have an analogy, I will be more like the conductor of the band or the Philharmonic than the pianist or the guy who plays violin or anything. It makes more sense to me because if I am involved cooking something, I limit myself. My vision is limited to 1 or 2 dishes. And I will not be able to have a good overview of the kitchen that is serving the rest of the dining room. So I like to believe that the chef shouldn't be necessarily cooking on the line. It's much better to teach someone to cook exactly like the way you would or I would, and then to keep this good overview of the kitchen and also a very critical eye about the product that we are serving. When you cook something, you have the tendency to excuse yourself because it's always a good reason not to do the right thing. You always challenge. So sometimes you have the tendency to lower your guard by doing that. When you just looking at the cooks, encouraging the cooks, giving the rhythm to the kitchen, and testing the food, you have no pity and you have zero tolerance for mistakes. So that I think it's my view of what the chef should do in the kitchen.
Thank you, Chef.
Hi, I was kind of wondering, tasting menus often have multiple courses and, sometimes they have 7 or 8. And so at the end, sometimes you're really full and you can't finish everything. And so do chefs take it personally if you've created this masterpiece and then at the end, the person can't finish it? And I only ask this because then I've probably offended many people. But towards the end, I can't finish it, even though I think it's like the most amazing dish. And so I'm just kind of wondering what happens like when, someone brings the plate back in and then you see there's like food on it.
Yeah. Actually, I used to work for a chef in Paris that will inspect every plate. So every waiter coming back to the kitchen will bring back and show all the plates. And even if it will be like a tiny, tiny piece, he will freak out and go crazy after us. Testing menus are interesting because it's multi-course, like you said, and what we try to do when we create a tasting menu, we try to have the right portions that will allow you to go through 8 courses or 6 courses or 7 courses, depending of what the tasting menu is. So if we give you a portion like that, you cannot have 8 pieces in your stomach like that in 2 hours of time. So we try to reduce the portion. We try to have something that can be eaten in 2 or 3 bites, because if it's too small, I think it's a pity, because you swallow it in 1 second and then it's done and you're like, oh, next. So I don't like micro food. I like to have 2 or 3 bites, and but not more than that. So we create something where at the end, in theory, you should be, how you say, satiated, but not, falling asleep. Now, if you cannot finish your menu, probably the waiter is going to ask you if everything is fine and if you're okay, and then we'll report in the kitchen saying, this lady is starting to slow down, or and we try not to be offended.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering how often you revisit past dishes. So in particular, have you ever rerun a dish you served perhaps 7 years ago, and hopefully people are, re-energized by it, or have you sort of ever run a variation of a past dish that was very good, but its time had come to be removed many years ago?
Sometimes it's very tempting to go back to the past because it makes it easy, but by discipline, I never go back to the past, because the way I create dishes and create harmony has evolved. I have a different vision. I have learned different techniques that I want to apply. My taste is very different, and I think if we can make an analogy, it's like in the fashion world. If a designer starts to do a collection that he was doing 5 years before, it's like you look at it and it's totally obsolete. And maybe 50 years later, sometimes they get inspired by what was happening, but when you look at something that was created 50 years earlier and something that will be created today, it's a whole universe in between, because the fabrics and because the technology used and so on. So in the food is the same. The way I used to, for instance, believe a dish was really the ultimate in my cooking range. And when I look at it today and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, doesn't make sense anymore today. It's absolute. Those ideas are obsolete. It evolves very fast.
Hi, Chef. Thanks again for coming. So when you're in the Bay Area, where do you choose to eat?
I try to eat everywhere. But I have a lot of friends in the industry, so I have the tendency to go see my friends. And of course, when I go say hello, it's no way I can leave. One of my dear friends has few restaurants in San Francisco. He has Aqua and Fifth Floor. So I'm sure tonight or tomorrow I'm going to be eating there. And then I always go to Zuni Cafe to have oysters and chicken.
Roast chicken, very famous.
And I try new places that my friends recommend, and sometimes I go to some very obscure kind of dive bar places with great food, and it changes all the time. In this trip, I'm going to be 3 nights in San Francisco, and I would love to try this slanted door that I have never tried. I heard many good things about it. And again, I'm going to be cornered at Aqua somewhere tonight or tomorrow, and then the rest I'll see.
Well, again, Chef, thank you very much for coming and speaking with us today. I have not yet been to Le Bernardin. It's on my list as soon as I go to New York City, but a friend of mine was just there, and she said that the bread in particular was amazing. And so I was wondering what your philosophy is outside of the fish for the amuse-bouche and like the bread. How do you approach the sort of secondary dishes?
Well, actually, we don't see anything as secondary. We pay attention to every detail, and if you want to have something, an excellent product, I think the detail, the attention to the detail makes the difference, and of course the consistency makes the difference with something that wouldn't be at the same level. But the way we select products I mean, logically, it's by eating them. So we try many recipes of bread, for instance, many pieces of bread, and then we select what we think is the most appropriate for the restaurant. And then from that point of view, we try to keep the consistency of that product, because you cannot have one day the bread a little bit too dark, the day after not so soft, the day after flat, the day after too fluffy. So it's you have to create an organization that is going to help you to, without being in total chaos all day and being too stressed, to create those items.
Hello again. So to obtain a 3-star Michelin restaurant, you've got to have everything in sheer perfection. The back of the house, the front of the house, the restrooms, the linen, the wines, and everything has to be sheer perfection. Does the front of the house staff ever suspect when a Michelin guy comes in, and what is the atmosphere like in the kitchen?
Well, the good news with the Michelin is that they send inspectors that are totally anonymous. So therefore, there's no stress in the kitchen, we don't know. But we have different ratings in New York, and I'm sure you have that here too. For instance, the New York Times sends a journalist that is the food critic of the New York Times. And most of the time, after few months at the newspaper, is recognized by the industry. Everybody has the picture posted in a drawer, behind the kitchen door, I mean, everywhere. So when you have someone like that, or someone that is a journalist in the food industry, it is true that it brings pressure to the team. But we try to not stress. It's not we try. We don't stress about it too much. And it doesn't make a difference for the kitchen if a food critic enters at 8 o'clock at night. If we know, if we don't know, a lot of the preparations are already partially made. If your fish wasn't fresh and is stinky, it's nothing you can do about it. If the sauce is burned and tastes bitter, you cannot save it. It's too late. It's a long process to make a sauce. So what we do not to be stressed and not to have incidents like that, it's every day before lunch and before dinner, the 5 sous chefs that I have and myself, we test what we call the mise en place. We test every sauce that exists in a restaurant and every ingredient that is going to be served that night. And what we do before we test all those items, which is about probably 50 or 60, we take a tiny bit, not too much. But sometimes our palate, especially on the morning, if you get drunk the night before, your palate is not as sensitive the day after. Sometimes you're very sensitive to salt, sometimes you're not. So what we have done, we buy some very basic cheddar, industrially made, because the profile of the cheddar is artificial and will be always the same. It tastes fairly okay. And we tested, and if it tastes fairly okay, we know our palate is right on. If the cheddar tastes very, very bland, our palate is not sensitive to salt. If the cheddar is fairly aggressive, we know we're ultra sensitive. So we all test the cheese, and then go and after visiting the entire kitchen like that, we decide, we meet again and we say, what is it that is not right today? So therefore, we know like maybe we should change the sauce for the fluke or something like that. And then we are very confident about what is going to happen during the service. So then if someone comes and is a journalist, we feel very secure that he can choose whatever he wants. We are okay. It's going to be fine. And that also ensures the rest of the clientele that we serve equality. So, but to go back to the Michelin is really impossible to spot those guys because they don't come by themselves with a little notepad, you know, and look everywhere because that would be too easy. They come like normal guests and don't talk about food and have their experience and then decide the ratings. I mean, I believe that, I don't know.
All right, I think we have time for one more question because I see a lot of books, which I'm sure you want signed. So, anyone else?
How do you decide what to serve your staff?
What we serve the staff? Well, we have meetings, and it's a weekly meeting, and we decide for the menu for the following week. It's one thing that, so lunch and dinner is different, of course, and we have a lot of ethnicities working together in the restaurant, so we try to please everyone. However, it's one item that is universal, and that is a Saturday night staple, is the pizza. Every Saturday night we have a pizza party before service. But we try to visit different cultures, and at the same time we have a lot of our employees coming from South America who really enjoy eating rice with their meals. So we always have that option on the side because if not, they miss it. But we try to be a little bit French, a little bit South American, a little bit Italian, a little bit Chinese. So we try to have a variety of flavors, but also of ingredients. So if you eat meat for lunch, you have fish for dinner. And then sometimes, actually twice a week is only vegetarian. And everybody's happy like that. I hope.
Chef, do you get, when you go places, do you get recognized? You said you try to go to new places. Do they say, oh,
well, it's with my white hair, it's difficult not to be spotted. In my industry, I'm fairly known, and at the end of the day, I'm not a food critic or a journalist, so it's a very friendly relationship. And when I go to a place, most of the time they recognize me. And when they don't, it's fine too, because I can finally have dinner with my wife. But yes, most of the time I'm recognized, at least in New York.
He's being pretty modest, let me tell you. So. All right, well, that's it, you guys. Chef, I want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. You've been a really great guest, seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.